Procter & Gamble can.
Yeah, yeah. I think higher education and healthcare, probably two good examples of that. I mean, for me, part of it is just getting back to basics, right? I think from 2012 to 2019, we've had it easy, right? If you look at higher ed, there's a lot of demand in the marketplace. There's a lot of money in the marketplace. It's just an easy environment to do business, right? And when it's easy, sometimes folks get lazy, right? Like you wouldn't imagine the number of accounts that I audit where people are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, and just the basics that you would assume they would have, they don't have, right? So just super basic example, if you're promoting a nursing program and I click through to your ad, there's not a picture of a nurse on the landing page. This isn't like, 300 an hour consulting level type stuff here. This is like, basic stuff that people should be doing. And I don't think it's for a lack of understanding. I mean, it might be, but I don't want to say it's a lack of understanding. I think it's just, you didn't need to get that granular because times were good. And now that times are getting harder, and you combine the fact that not only is the economic reality harder, there's so much more competition because all these schools are trying to scramble to pivot into online, whatever they define online as. So you have a ton of people entering the market. And now is the time where if you don't have that level of granularity that you used to need, you're not gonna go very far. And I'm just always shocked, like, big budget, and they're kind of missing the basics, and they certainly have the funds. Some people don't have the funds to get that granular and make tons of different landing pages, for example, for every program. But it's just a world where I think we got to kind of snap out of it, realize what we had, and move forward and sort of get back to basics and start auditing, to your point, to make sure that we're doing the things that we really need to do.
That's so dead on, and your examples are accurate. The same thing happens with, folks will be sending out old nurturing emails that they didn't kill like 2 and 3 years ago, and I mean, it's just to your point of, just basic pictures and, there's like, I see it as there's a triangle with each account or with each school or, business really. But in the context of higher ed, you need to have, your data in place. Right. And again, it doesn't have to be super fancy if you're starting from scratch, but you need to understand what the metrics of what is flowing through your environment. Right. You need to have your game together. Right. You need to have pictures of nurses with nursing landing pages. Right. Not complicated, but you've got to audit every single touch point a student has. But then number 3 to me, and I think a lot of folks miss this as well, especially as a marketer. I find very few marketers who do this, but to me, the most valuable thing is getting as close to students as you can, and often in this environment, listening to calls. I was working with a private for-profit institution over the last few years. We took cost of acquisition from north of $7K down to about $1,200 a student, and I got a lot of invites to speak, and other folks reaching out, and word kind of spread, and vendors would have me to talk to other schools, and people would be shocked, but the truth was they'd ask me, what of anything that you did? And again, I have a very analytical background. We can go through predictive models, lifetime value models, lead scoring, all of that stuff is important. That's in that first analytical bucket with the metrics I mentioned. The most important thing I did was, when I started working with them, I'd work all day in the office and work on 1 and 2, right? We're auditing our landing pages, working on metrics. But then I'd load up my laptop with calls from the call center and take it home at night and just listen for 5, 6, 7 hours to calls. This is a marketer buying leads. I wanted to understand what students were saying, where they were coming from, how the conversation sounded, what their questions were. And you'd be shocked. The first things that they were wondering or wanting to talk about were nowhere in our marketing channel. And I knew that because, to your point, I was on the landing pages. I was reading every email. If it left our office, I wanted to see it and read it and know it and understand it. And what you have in marketing today is a lot of folks who are good at one of those 3, right? They came up because they were really analytic, or they came up because they were really creative, or they came up through admissions and they're great talking to people. The higher ed leader of tomorrow, marketing leader of tomorrow, has got to run that triangle. They got to be analytical, they got to be creative, and they got to be as close to the business as possible. And again, designing marketing programs, designing products because they've listened to students, they've met students, they've taken a class, right? And they kind of understand the current environment because they've gotten as close to the student as possible.
Yep. Every time I'll talk to folks, I'll say, when was the last time you listened to a call? Right? Because the more you listen to calls, the more you put proactively what questions they have, for example, you put that in your marketing, you're making it so much easier for your call center folks to do their job. And you're also making it extremely more efficient, right? Because the handle time on those calls is going to be a lot lower because they're already calling in with most of their questions answered. So it's a complicated relationship, but a necessary one that I think a lot of people miss.
Totally. Yeah.
Great. Well, I guess another topic we wanted to cover just to close is around strategic partnerships. I know you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but can you talk a little bit about strategic partnerships, some examples, and how you think that your people are going to make the transition to that?
Yeah. And this is something that most higher education leaders have talked about, flirted with. It's not a new concept, but folks have to figure out how to monetize in new ways. One of my more popular topics of conversation is what hasn't changed in this country at the end of the day with respect to education is how we fund it. And that really is a K-12 problem as much as it is a 16 through 20 problem. And the funding mechanisms that we've built many universities on, call it Title IV financial aid, scholarships, endowments. Again, those things are undergoing a sea change. Students also aren't as excited about taking on student debt, right? Like it's a whole separate conversation we didn't have to deal with in the past. So the degree to which an institution could partner with, whether it's private sector, public sector, through other governments, is absolutely critical. And again, this is where it takes the mind and the heart of an innovator to be open-minded about the opportunities. But if you take somebody like Amazon, for instance, and they very publicly put $700 million into what they call their career choice training, their play with their staff is they're going to hire frontline inexperienced people, and if they retain with Amazon for a year or two, they will then fund their education and training for a specific job that is more than likely outside of Amazon, right? Completely new model. Caught a lot of schools off guard. Some schools participated, some didn't. Some non-traditional providers have participated, but we're starting to see that. McDonald's has their Golden Arches program. Amazon's got Career Choice. Disney's got their Aspire program. You go to work at a Disney park, you're 18, you don't have any experience, you work there for a period of time, and they'll go fund your education so you can train for jobs outside of Disney. The shift that we've seen historically with training and its education's relationship with private enterprise, 50 years ago, if you wanted to cut hair, you didn't necessarily go to hair school, right? Like my great aunt cut hair for a living. She started in Asheville, North Carolina, sweeping the shop floor. They'd kind of let her, apprentice her way through. And then finally she was, over time she was cutting hair. What we saw through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that shifted back to institutions and places of business, companies, corporations freed up a training budget. They didn't really have to take that on anymore, right? We had career schools and VOTEX and community colleges take a lot of that frontline training burden. So that pendulum has swung from private businesses working through an apprenticeship model, then it's swung all the way over to schools. And I think what we're going to see from today moving forward is more of an intermingling or a mix where that pendulum comes back in the middle. Businesses are going to be willing to fund training and education because it's been hard to find equipped and qualified talent. And what we're hearing from businesses, what I hear from private companies, large and small, is they're impatient. They're tired of waiting on a community college. If they want to open a factory in a new town, the community college just isn't able to respond in an agile, nimble way. They need new providers with new models, new ways of doing things that can meet their demand. They're willing to pay for it, but you've really got to hew to their specifications, right? That kind of old-fashioned University of Phoenix, I was at University of Phoenix for 10 years model where, you're going to contract with Washington Mutual and they're going to pay for their employees' MBAs. Nobody's really there anymore at scale the way it was. Folks need frontline talent. in highly specialized areas, but they don't have agile, nimble providers that can provide that education. Learning organizations, whether it's a university or a non-traditional provider, that can agilely, nimbly adapt and meet those private enterprises where they are, deploy that education and training, I think will be successful. And I think there's a huge market for it. You're starting to see some folks move into that space. But I think that's really the next wave of how do we figure out the funding challenge and how do we help businesses grow and still feed revenue to our institutions. That pendulum is going to come back in the middle. Business and education is going to mix. Business is happy to fund it, but education has to treat business more like a customer and design things to their specifications and needs. And, some people do it and win, and other folks will wait and see and kind of stand on the sidelines.
Yeah. And I think, there's a lot of infrastructure the higher ed company needs to have in order to make that successful that maybe they're not used to, right? Doing B2B sales is not something that most people that are traditionally not in B2B sales just have in the corner, that they can turn on. And it's, it kind of goes back to our earlier kind of the theme of the conversation, right? It's a new model, and you're going to need to have people that are willing to take those steps and take that leap of faith to make it happen. And you might have some of those, and you might have some of those that kind of retreat into a shell, as you put it, and they're just going to leave the more opportunity on the table for those that understand they need to pivot, where they're going to pivot to, and then actually invest in the pivoting. And it could be B2B sales, it could be going from direct response to brand. I mean, there's multiple different ways I think people can pivot and get to a successful outcome, but they're going to need to have the risk tolerance and the vision to actually get there.
Yeah, it's a commitment to pivot, right? I mean, that's the first step, because you're going to make mistakes. It's rough. I mean, B2B sales is not easy, but I think that's where the market's moving. And just at a high level, and clearly, the world has changed over the last few months. From a mission-oriented perspective, most of the companies that we talk to, their number one challenge from a growth perspective is qualified technical talent for very important critical roles that don't necessarily need a college degree. They just need the talent. I mean, the world moves so fast now, and they don't have time to wait for folks to make it through a protracted degree program. So my point is, it's not just a commitment to institutional health. It's, at a national level, we've got to figure this out, because it's the best, fastest way to move our economy forward is continue to feed qualified, talented individuals in technical roles to the companies that are growing. Again, that gets really fuzzy over the last few months, as we've unfortunately, tragically seen 40 million people lose their jobs. But when this flips and we get on the other side, getting those people into the jobs that companies need now, somebody's going to have to figure out how to do that in an agile, nimble way. To your point, the first step really is a commitment and mindset, because it's so different from the way institutions have historically operated.
And the time is now, right? Because there's a less demand, right? Those companies need less workers today. And so you have the time to get the workers trained and align that, so when they are ready, you've solved their problem, right? But you have to start now.
That's right. Hey, Kamar's always got the brilliant quotes or the parables, and I've got one exactly what you just said. I think I can top him with this one. There's this ancient Chinese parable, right? And the question is, when's the best time to plant a tree? And the answer is either 20 years ago or today, right? We could have all done this 20 years ago and be a lot better set up for today, but the reality is we didn't. So today's the best day to do it. Again, it'll be fun to watch. I think some folks will. Hopefully some of that entrepreneurial talent sees the opportunity and continues to fuel, the growth for higher ed and education at large.
Yeah, Jason, I have one last question I wanted to get in. That, triangle performance, right? Analytical, creative, and student experience, or, getting close to the student. Right. Which one do you think COVID exposed the most as a gap in higher education?
Man, God, that's a great question. COVID did change. I mean, one thing we haven't talked about, COVID fundamentally changed online patterns, right? I've been running data throughout. I mean, everybody went online. Social's never seen more traffic. But, they've been searching for different, keyword patterns have changed, right? That was, some of the stuff I looked at, some of your core in higher ed, just your AdWords terms, volume had moved by a 20% delta as we entered through COVID. And my concern was folks weren't